Uncle, please, no, please stop, it's too big. Please, it's hurting me, and it's very painful. Uncle, please, it's paining me. Please, sir, stop. Hey, family, I'm sure you'd be wondering why a 6-year-old little girl would be begging her uncle to stop, that what he was doing to her is very painful and hurting. Now sit back as we dive into the story properly. Please subscribe to my channel. The Akintala family was a modern-day portrait of co-parenting after divorce. Amina, a hard-working single mother, was always swamped with her responsibilities as a corporate executive. Despite her busy schedule, she ensured that her 6-year-old daughter, Zara, had everything she needed. Zara was a bubbly, curious child with an infectious smile and a love for painting and storytelling. With her demanding work hours and no one to assist, Amina decided to hire a house help. After contacting several agencies, they informed her that only one person was available for immediate employment, a man named Tund, who came highly recommended with glowing past reviews. Despite her reservations about hiring a male help, Amina, pressed for time, reluctantly accepted, trusting the agency's assurance. Tund was 28 years old, soft-spoken, and impeccably neat. On the surface, he seemed like the ideal choice. His calm demeanor and apparent devotion to his duties quickly won Amina's confidence. She reassured herself that Zara would be in safe hands, especially since her ex-husband, Teo, also agreed to the decision, hoping the arrangement would ease Amina's burden. However, behind Tund's polished exterior lurked a man with sinister intentions. From the very first day, Tund began to exert subtle control over Zara. At first, it was harmless corrections, sternly telling her to finish her homework properly or scolding her lightly for spilling juice. Zara, eager to please, thought nothing of it, brushing off his tone as something normal. As weeks passed, Tund's behavior towards Zara grew increasingly harsh. He began to yell at her for minor mistakes, locking her in her room if she didn't finish her meals, or even smacking her lightly when she cried. Zara, too young to comprehend the situation, began to believe that she deserved the punishments and felt too afraid to tell her mother or father. Tund took full advantage of Amina's long hours and Teo's limited presence. Knowing neither of them questioned his word or checked in on Zara's complaints, little did they know that their decision to hire him would unravel their daughter's innocence and joy. Tund's cruelty did not stop at physical punishment. His manipulation ran deeper. One day, he began showing Zara disturbing videos on his phone, telling her, "This is what happens to children who misbehave." Zara did not understand the explicit content, but it left her feeling confused and terrified. She became withdrawn, her once bright laughter disappearing, replaced by a quiet, nervous demeanor. Tund's threats became more menacing. "If you tell your mother or father, I'll hurt them too," he whispered to her one evening, holding her small wrist tightly. Zara, scared and too young to process the depth of the threat, kept quiet, carrying the burden of fear alone. Amina, unaware of what was happening, continued to trust Tund, who maintained his flawless facade whenever she was around. He cooked meals, helped clean, and even pretended to assist Zara with her school projects in her mother's presence. But as Tund's twisted behavior escalated, Zara's behavior at school started to change. Her teachers noticed her becoming quieter and more withdrawn. She no longer participated in class activities or smiled as often. While they assumed it was a passing phase, Zara's fear of Tun deepened, and her home became a silent prison. Tun's manipulation reached new heights when he began isolating Zara completely. He told her not to speak to anyone about what happened at home and intercepted any notes or communication from her teachers to Amina. The once lively Zara was now a shadow of her former self, trapped in fear and confusion, while her parents remained unaware of the darkness lurking within their home. Tun's behavior took an even darker turn. One afternoon, as Zara returned from school, she greeted him timidly. "Good afternoon, Uncle Tun." He barely glanced at her, scrolling through his phone. Then, without warning, he called her over. "Zara, come with me to the bathroom." Confused and uneasy, Zara followed hesitantly. As he began to undress, she instinctively turned away, covering her eyes with her small hands. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice sharp and cold. She shook her head, trembling, and whispered, "I don't want to, Uncle." Ignoring her protests, Tun pulled her closer, forcing her to stand near him. "You need to learn to obey me," he said with a twisted smile. Zara stood frozen, her hands still covering her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks as she begged, "Please, Uncle, I don't want to watch. Please let me go." But Tund wasn't finished. After bathing himself, he turned his attention to her, insisting on bathing her too. His hands lingered in ways that made Zara deeply uncomfortable. She tried to pull away, but his grip was firm, his tone stern as he barked, "Stop squirming, or it will be worse for you." Each touch left her feeling violated, her innocence chipped away piece by piece. Every day after school, the same horrifying routine unfolded. Zara dreaded going home, knowing what awaited her. She would stand there in the bathroom, her small frame shaking, hands covering her eyes, silently crying and praying for it to end. But Tun always insisted, "Look at me, Zara. Don't make me angry." She would flinch at his tone, her heart pounding as she obeyed out of fear. Each night, Zara would cry herself to sleep, clutching her teddy bear tightly, wishing her mother or father would notice her pain. But the torment didn't stop there. Tun's control extended beyond the bathroom. He used her silence as leverage, whispering chilling threats. "If you tell anyone, Zara, I'll hurt your parents." "Do you want that?" he said one evening, his voice low and menacing. Terrified of his words, Zara remained silent, burying her fears deep inside. The once joyful little girl now lived in constant dread, her bright spirit dimmed by the weight of her secret. Her cries for help were silent, her pain hidden behind the fear of making things worse. Zara's world was collapsing around her, yet Tun maintained his flawless act in front of Amina and Teo. He continued to act like the perfect housekeeper, cooking meals, keeping the house spotless, and even helping Zara with her schoolwork when they were around. To them, he was a blessing, someone they could rely on in their busy lives. But Zara knew the truth. Her once safe home had become a place of nightmares, and her small voice, muffled by fear, remained unheard. How long could she endure this? And would anyone realize the pain hidden in her innocent eyes before it was too late? Tun's actions grew darker and more terrifying each day. After Zara returned from school, she would hear his voice calling her to the bathroom. "Come here, Zara," he would say in a commanding tone. Reluctantly, she obeyed, her tiny legs dragging her into the space she had come to dread. As she stood by the door, Tun began undressing himself, then glanced at her, his eyes cold. "Come closer," he said sharply. Zara hesitated, trembling as she whispered, "Uncle, please. I don't want to." "Look at me," he barked, his voice loud enough to make her flinch. Zara covered her eyes with her hands, tears forming as she shook her head. "I don't want to, Uncle Tund. Please let me go." But Tund wasn't interested in her pleas. He moved closer, pulled her hands away from her face, and forced her to watch him bathe. Zara stood there, her small body trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks as she quietly sobbed, "Please, Uncle, I don't want to be here." After bathing himself, Tund would turn his attention to Zara, insisting on bathing her too. His hands roamed in ways that made her feel deeply uncomfortable, her body stiffening as she tried to pull away. "Stay still," he would snap, gripping her arm tightly. She felt helpless, powerless against his strength, her cries falling on deaf ears. Every day became a cycle of fear and humiliation. Zara dreaded coming home from school, knowing the horrors that awaited her. Each night, she lay on her bed clutching her pillow, tears soaking the fabric as she whispered, "Why is this happening to me?" Her once bright world had become a living nightmare. One day, while playing outside, Zara met an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Thompson. The kind woman immediately noticed the sadness in Zara's eyes and the hesitation in her voice. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Zara nodded but couldn't hide the tears welling up in her eyes. "If you ever need help, my door is always open," Mrs. Thompson said softly, placing a comforting hand on Zara's shoulder. For the first time in weeks, Zara felt a flicker of hope, but she was too scared to say anything, fearing what Tun might do if he found out. That evening, Tun noticed a faint smile on Zara's face after her encounter with Mrs. Thompson. Jealous and enraged, he intensified his cruelty. He took her favorite doll and tore it apart in front of her, his face smug as he reveled in her pain. Zara cried bitterly, clutching the broken pieces of her toy, feeling as if every part of her life was being destroyed. As the weeks passed, Zara's behavior became harder to ignore. Her once radiant face now appeared pale and gaunt. She flinched at the slightest touch, her eyes constantly darting around as if searching for an escape. Mrs. Thompson, still observing from afar, grew more concerned. One day, determined to find the truth, Mrs. Thompson approached Amina directly. "I think something's wrong with Zara," she said, her voice heavy with concern. But Amina, exhausted from work and trusting Tund completely, dismissed the worries. "Tund has been wonderful with Zara. It's probably just a phase," she said, brushing it off. Tund, overhearing the conversation, became even more cautious. He intercepted any attempts by Mrs. Thompson to reach Amina or Teo, always putting on his perfect, polite facade. But Mrs. Thompson wasn't convinced. She began keeping a closer eye on the house, determined to uncover what was happening. Meanwhile, Zara's hope for rescue started to fade. One evening, during a rare moment alone, she scribbled a shaky note on a piece of paper. "Help me." She slipped it into her backpack, hoping a teacher or classmate would find it. But Tund, suspicious of her every move, searched her bag and found the note. Ripping it to shreds in front of her, he glared at Zara with unmasked rage. "So, you think you can get away from me?" he sneered. That night, he locked her in the basement, her cries echoing in the dark as she begged to be let out. Despite her despair, a small part of Zara clung to hope. Every night, she prayed silently, wishing for someone to notice her pain. Unbeknownst to her, Mrs. Thompson was growing more determined to protect her, watching Tun's every move and waiting for the right moment to act. One fateful evening, after Zara had endured another grueling day, she lay curled up in her bed, her tear-streaked face buried in her pillow. But something inside her stirred, a faint flicker of courage. She decided to try once more, to reach out, to hope that someone would hear her silent cries. The next day at school, while the teacher was busy, Zara slipped another note into her desk. "This time," she wrote, "please help me. My Uncle Tun hurts me. Don't tell him, or he'll hurt my mommy." Her hands trembled as she left the note, hoping someone would discover it. Would Zara's silent cries for help finally reach someone who could save her? Or would Tun's grip tighten even further, leaving her trapped in a nightmare that seemed never-ending? To be continued.